Tonight on NewsCenter, Korea's political parties turn to full election mode. Those running in the April race will hit the campaign trail later this week for the 13-day official campaigning. Pakistan mourns the death of at least 70 people in Sunday's Taliban suicide bombing in a crowded public park in Lahore. Seoul condemns the terrorists. And 6,000 Chinese tourists landed in Incheon today, the single largest group to ever come by plane. Driven by the Asia-wide boom of Korean pop culture, a massive fiesta for them involving 2.5 tons of fried chicken and beer. NewsCenter begins right now. It is 9 a.m. in Washington, D.C., 6 p.m. in Lahore, and 10 on a Monday night here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to our viewers all across the globe. You're watching Arirang NewsCenter. When President Park Geun-hye meets global leaders in Washington later this week at the Nuclear Security Summit, she'll continue to garner support from the international community to further pressure North Korea to abandon its nuclear weapons program. The president's agenda there and in Mexico. Our presidential office correspondent Song Ji-sun reports.
President Park Geun-hye is set to embark on an 8-day trip Wednesday to attend a nuclear security summit in Washington, followed by summit talks in Mexico City. Park's official schedule begins with a reception and dinner hosted by U.S. President Barack Obama at the White House on Thursday. At the plenary on Friday, 50-plus state representatives will assess their achievements since the last summit and seek ways to strengthen cooperation for increased nuclear security. But what happens outside the summit venue is just as important. Japanese media earlier reported that South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. will hold trilateral summit talks on the sidelines, mainly to discuss North Korea's nuclear issue. Bilateral talks between the leaders of Korea and Japan are also likely in a follow-up to their first summit talks 5 months ago. President Park would then fly to Mexico City for a summit with her Mexican counterpart, Enrique Peña Nieto. Mexico, a strategic cooperative partner with Seoul, is the second largest economy in Central and South America with a GDP worth over $1.2 trillion. It also acts as a bridge linking North and South America. 12 Korean companies utilize Mexico as a stepping stone to enter the Americas. A business entourage representing 144 companies and organizations will accompany the presidential delegation. Her visit to Mexico is the first overseas trip to be made since UN sanctions on Pyongyang went into effect. President Park and Peña Nieto will also discuss ways for strict implementation of sanctions on North Korea. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea is armed and ready to retaliate against any future provocations by North Korea using its effective weapons program. That's according to Seoul's defense ministry. Meanwhile, in a rare message to South Korea's military, President Park Geun-hye has called for a strong military with readiness and overwhelming deterrence against North Korean threats. For more on South Korea's military's readiness against the North, here's our Oh Jung-hee.
South Korea will counter North Korea's threat of multiple rocket launchers and long-range artillery systems. This was the message delivered by South Korean Defense Minister Han Min-gu during his visit to a Cheonmu multiple launch rocket system unit on Monday.
Our military should powerfully retaliate and wipe out North Korea's will to make further provocations. We'll have to reinforce that such provocations will lead to self-destruction.
His visit comes after North Korea fired multiple rocket launchers last week that flew some 200 kilometers into the East Sea. If the North's 300mm multiple rocket launchers are dispatched at the demilitarized zone, it can target the American base in Pyeongtaek, the Air Force Base in Cheongju, and the Gaeryong military headquarters. In response to these threats, the Defense Ministry revealed earlier in the day that the South Korean Army is building up its weapons program to effectively defend against North Korea's missiles.
We are building up an integrated anti-artillery system to counter recent threats from the north. The technologies of the Chunmoo MLRS, ATACMS and SLAM-ER will be integrated to create a new attack system.
The Chunmoo MLRS, adopted last year, is a system that can fire 12 rockets with a maximum range of 80 kilometers. The ATACMS, or the Army Tactical Missile System, can fly up to 300 kilometers surface to surface and destroy an area equivalent to 3 to 4 soccer fields. In addition to these attack systems, the SLAM-ER cruise missiles can be air-launched, reaching 200 kilometers. In line with the South Korean Army's efforts, President Park Geun-hye has called soldiers to maintain a thorough military readiness posture. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Could North Korea be cracking under the latest set of UNSC as well as national-level sanctions imposed on the regime over its recent nuclear missile tests? A report in North Korean Daily suggests that pressure is definitely starting to become real on the ground in the reclusive state. Our Connie Kim reports.
The North's daily Dodong-Shinmun on Monday hinted at the possibility of a second arduous march, indicating that the regime is feeling pressured following UN sanctions and the largest ongoing South Korea-US military drills. The arduous march is a propaganda campaign launched by Pyongyang in the 1990s during the famine that killed some 3.5 million people. It's the first time the Daily has used the term arduous march since UN sanctions were imposed on Pyongyang following its fourth nuclear test and long-range missile launch. The heaviest UN sanctions to date on Pyongyang include inspections of all cargo in and out of North Korea by air, sea, or land, and limiting coal, iron, and gold exports. While the sanctions are designed to pressure the North to give up its nuclear weapons program, experts on North Korea say that China's participation will be crucial to cutting off funds for Pyongyang's nuclear weapons development.
The UN Security Council Resolution 2270 allows for iron and coal exports to cover livelihood purposes. How effective UN sanctions are will depend on China's interpretation of those needs.
China has a history of loosening sanctions on Pyongyang, its traditional ally, just as it did in 2013 after North Korea conducted its third nuclear test. Beijing recently negotiated the reinstatement of 4 ships that were blacklisted for illicit activities, allowing Pyongyang to engage in international trade. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The countdown begins. 3 days remaining before the official campaigning period begins for the upcoming general elections. Korea's political parties have been launching committees to spearhead their campaigns over the next couple of weeks. Our political correspondent Ji Myung-gil gives us the updates.
The ruling Saenuri Party has adjusted its leadership with the April 13th election in mind. The collective leadership is composed of 5 members from the pro and non-pro PAC factions of the party. The faction of the Saenuri Party loyal to President Park Geun-hye and those led by party chairman Kim Moo-sung renewed their pledges on Monday to recover a parliamentary majority after weeks of factional strife over the candidate nominations.
No more internal rifts remain in our Saenuri Party. Our only goal is to win the upcoming general election. By gaining victory, we will strengthen national security, boost the stagnant economy, and create more jobs.
On the other side, the main opposition Minju Party of Korea said it will focus its election pledges and party platform upon economic issues.
The upcoming election will be Judgment Day for the Saenuri Party's 8 years of flawed economic policies. The Minju Party will strive to achieve its vision to harmonize distribution and growth while promoting democracy.
Kim Jong-in, the interim leader of the Minju Party, was in the central city of Daejeon on Monday for meetings with some of the party's candidates. The Minju Party also withdrew its campaign pledge to move the National Assembly to the administrative city of Sejong from Seoul, as leader Kim said the pledge needed more time for reviewing. The minor opposition People's Party has expanded its election committee with 6 co-chairmen, leading a nationwide campaign, up from the original 4. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
So voting day for the 20th parliamentary election is a little over 2 weeks away on April 13th here in Korea. But Koreans living in other parts of the world cast their ballots early. A 6-day voting window for overseas Korean nationals opened this Wednesday. Our parliamentary correspondent Shin Se-min joins me to give our Korean viewers abroad a general overview of the entire process. Now, Se-min, give us the A to Z on the entire process of voting for overseas Koreans.
Yes, Kanyang, over 154,000 Koreans living outside of the country have registered to vote for next month's general election. That's about 8% of the estimated 1.9 million eligible Korean nationals currently living outside of the country. Now, that figure is up 27% compared to the previous general elections held in 2012. The National Election Commission says that most of these absentee ballots will come from the United States, followed by Japan and China. And what these overseas Koreans need to know in order to practice their right to vote is, first and foremost, to have their verification piece of identification on them. That means having a passport, driver's license, or a government-issued document with a photo ID. Once that's settled, they can receive a ballot to complete their vote, which will then be sealed, delivered, and counted. Korea's election watchdog expanded the number of polling stations overseas by creating additional locations in cities with more than 40,000 Korean expats. That's 25 extra stations in 6 countries, including the U.S., Japan, and Vietnam, bringing the total number of polling stations overseas to 198, including embassies and legation offices. Now, this year's general election marks the 3rd time overseas voting has been allowed since the government enacted a bill in 2009 granting Korean nationals living abroad the right to vote in Korea's parliamentary and presidential elections. This election especially is garnering more attention with an easier registration processes. Now, political pundits say that the delayed establishment of an electoral map gave overseas Koreans less time to check their constituencies, but also allowed for more awareness of the issues. They add, however, that in order to boost voter turnout in overseas countries, the political parties should roll out more campaign pledges that resonate with those Koreans living outside of the country. Kanyang?
Well, thank you, Se-min, and I'm sure you will keep us updated all throughout the election. That was our Shin Se-min on the overseas voting for the 20th National Assembly election. Korea's stiff regulations have been stifling efforts to support new technologies in industries such as the Internet of Things, self-driving cars, and even drones. Well, to resolve this problem and revitalize a sluggish economy, the Korean government has rolled out measures designated certain areas as regulation-free zones. Lee Min-young has the details.
Driverless cars are not allowed to travel the open road under current traffic laws. Unmanned aerial vehicles or drones cannot fly above certain altitudes without going through complicated procedures. These are all obstacles that the government is looking to scrap. Korea's finance ministry has proposed a bill that will create regulation-free zones to open up doors for various industries. The bill was originally scheduled to be submitted to the National Assembly in June, but the Korean government has sped up efforts to push the legislation through as soon as possible amid sluggish economic conditions at home and abroad. The government is looking to set up regulation-free business zones in 14 cities and provinces nationwide. Under the move, local administrations will be able to select and nurture their own strategic industries, like the Internet of Things and biohealth. They will fall under deregulation in order to facilitate development and business. The government also rolled out customized support measures, including tax cuts and subsidies, that will be offered within the regulation-free zones. The proposed plan falls in line with the government's economic policies on future growth, which includes propping up the country's falling exports. It's expected these measures will invigorate corporate investment, which would foster selected areas representing the fourth industrial revolution. Lee Min-young, Arirang News.
Seoul is a popular tourist destination for foreigners and a major cultural hub in Asia. But the Korean government is trying to diversify its attractions by introducing a variety of unique tourist programs. Our Kim Ji-yeon followed some tourists traveling to some of Korea's provincial regions for this report.
Korea has launched a bus service catering to foreign tourists to promote tourism in the country's provincial regions. Organized by the Visit Korea Committee, the K-Travel Bus Package offers convenient services at a low price. For an overnight trip, packages can range from $150 to $170 per person. This group of 10 tourists had the chance to visit Korea's southern city of Dongyang.
My first time in Dongyang, and it's like what I felt in Busan. I fell in love right away. Anything, like everything has prepared for you. The food, the transportation and everything. Even like the guide is also there to help you with the explanation if there's no like English translation. It's great.
One of the best things about this program is that we are able to bond with other foreign tourists during the trip. I would definitely recommend the bus travel program to acquaintances back in my home country.
Another rising trend in the local tourism sector that is attracting large groups of foreigners is incentive travel, in which foreign companies send employees on vacation to Korea as a reward for their hard work. 6,000 tourists from China, the largest group to visit Korea at a time, are divided into groups to see this tourist attraction in Songdo, Incheon City. Attracting incentive travel is a major focus for the local tourism sector due to potentially huge profitability for the regions.
The 6,000 Chinese tourists visiting as a result of incentive travel is estimated to generate $10.3 million for the city of Incheon. It also helps boost the image of the city as a tourist destination and offers foreigners another destination besides the traditional tourist regions of Jeju Island and the capital of Seoul.
To attract large numbers of tourists like Incheon has, the professor says that provincial cities need to devise ways to accommodate tens of thousands of tourists at a time and provide large venues for recreation as well as dining options. He also says that there's a need for better cultural content and exhibition programs that are unique to each region. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Well, if you've ever met up with friends here in Korea, it's likely that you've enjoyed the popular combination of fried chicken and beer, or chimek as it's called by locals. Well, in addition to being very tasty, it's also relatively cheap. But the same cannot be said for more healthy options like fruits and vegetables. Our Lee Ji-won has more.
One of the largest Chinese tour groups to visit Korea has experienced one of the most beloved food combos in Korea, fried chicken and beer. 4,500 of the 6,000 took part in a chicken and beer party in Seoul on Monday, inspired by a popular Korean drama that gained widespread attention overseas, especially in China. Many people enjoy it, and the latest data shows not only is it delicious, but it's also cheap to eat. $7.17 is the average market price for a kilogram of chicken breast in Korea. According to global database Numbeo, the cost of chicken in Korea ranked 30th among 118 countries. Switzerland had the most expensive price for chicken, with shoppers having to shell out $22.92 per kilo. Beer is also one cheap beverage in Korea. Half a liter costs about $1.69. The Maldives had the highest price for beer at $7.19. However, when it comes to buying vegetables and fruits in Korea, the bill can get quite expensive. For instance, a kilo of bananas costs $3.72 on average, the second highest in the world. The cost of tomatoes and lettuce were also high on the list in terms of absolute price. Although the rankings simply convert market prices into dollars and do not reflect income levels, some experts say inefficiency may be partly to blame for the high prices.
In most agricultural industries, there are too many distribution channels. This means less efficiency and higher prices for fresh goods. Also, farmers need to streamline production processes to ensure that the right goods reach the appropriate markets. Oftentimes, there is a surplus or shortage of goods due to inaccurate planning.
The expert added that information technology will allow consumers to deal directly with producers, thus lowering vegetable and fruit prices. IT can also help farmers better predict market needs and reduce production costs by automating processes. Ijiwon, Arirang News.
Now shifting our focus, hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers fought alongside North Korea during the Korean War, and many of them fell in South Korean territory where their remains have been buried since. After more than 60 years, some of them are going home. Kim Hae-sung has more on this story.
The remains of 36 Chinese soldiers killed during the Korean War will be returned to their homeland for final burial. Seoul's Defense Ministry held a ceremony on Monday, transferring the remains of the Chinese soldiers from a cemetery in the border city of Paju in preparation to be handed over to China on Thursday. The remains were excavated between March and November of last year, tested for DNA.
We completed our second round of testing to ensure the remains were of Chinese soldiers.
This is not the first time Seoul is repatriating remains to China. South Korea has repatriated a few dozen such soldiers through North Korea and the United Nations. After a summit between South Korea and China in 2013, Seoul started returning the remains directly to Beijing. This after President Park Geun-hye made an offer to President Xi Jinping as a symbolic gesture of friendship. Since then, 437 bodies were returned in 2014, and last year, 68 more bodies were sent back. Around 400,000 Chinese soldiers are known to have died while fighting alongside the North during the Korean War. This latest set of remains will be returned ahead of China's Qingming Festival, when relatives traditionally pay respects to their ancestors. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Barely a week since the horrific bombings in Brussels, another deadly act of terror takes lives. This time, a suicide attack rips through the city of Lahore in eastern Pakistan. The victims were mostly Christian women and children celebrating Easter. For more on this report, here's Hwang Ho-jun.
What was supposed to be a day of celebration quickly turned into a nightmare. A suicide bomber targeted a children's playground at a local family park in the eastern Pakistan city of Lahore on Sunday evening, killing at least 72 people and injuring more than 300 others. The victims were mostly women and children celebrating Easter moments before the deadly explosion. A faction of the Pakistani Taliban has claimed responsibility for the attack, claiming to have intentionally targeted those of Christian faith. The park is known for being a popular gathering place for Pakistani Christians. As the death toll continues to rise, the international community has been quick to condemn the terror attack and declare solidarity with Pakistan in the aftermath of the tragic Easter bombing. While expressing deep condolences to the victims and their families, Seoul's foreign ministry strongly emphasized the Korean government's firm stance to eradicate terrorism alongside the international community. The United Nations also released a statement urging the Pakistani government to do its utmost to apply protective measures to ensure the personal security of all individuals, including religious minority communities living in the country. The White House labeled the attack as cowardly and pledged to continue to partner with Pakistan to root out the scourge of terrorism. Social media users are also posting their thoughts and grievances online under the hashtag #PrayForLahore. Local authorities there have launched a manhunt to bring the militants behind the terror attack to justice. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Well, shifting our focus back to Brussels, where fatal attacks occurred there nearly a week ago, the number of people killed is still rising. Bruce Harrison is live with updates on Brussels here in the studio with me. Now, Bruce, Belgium's health minister says 3 to 4 more people have died from their injuries in those attacks.
That's right, Kanyang. The health minister, Maggie de Block, announced the deaths in a tweet. She also said that the medical teams at the hospitals in Brussels did the best they could for these people, and that now those deaths bring the total number to 35, and that does not include the 3 suicide bombers from the attacks.
Bruce, Belgium remains on high alert amid fears of other possible future attacks. And adding to the tension, police clashed with protesters in downtown Brussels on Sunday.
This was something they were trying to avoid. It was another ugly scene just less than a week after these attacks claimed by Islamic State terrorists. What happened was about 400 protesters were marching towards the city square in Brussels, the heart of the city. And even though organizers there had told them not to go, they'd canceled the event because they didn't want to burden the overtaxed police force. Most protesters, they were peaceful, but police did use water cannons on one specific group.
The confinement of the protest was very difficult from the beginning, as there were many people, not only at the Place de la Bourse, but also on their way. There were families, children, so confinement was very difficult. It was a very dangerous operation to stop these people.
Many citizens were upset, and they said the memorial was not the right place or time for such protests.
If they are troublemakers, they don't come to reflect, they come for trouble. They do that in all demonstrations when they can.
Police have carried out 13 new raids in Belgium in connection with the attacks. Prosecutors say 9 people have been questioned recently. 5 of those were later released. A new study indicates elderly Japanese people are seeking prison time for the food, shelter, and health care that comes with getting locked up. As reported by the Financial Times, the study says there's good reason to suspect a wave of shoplifting is the result of elderly people trying to get convicted. Times reports Japan's prison system is being driven to budgetary crisis by demographics, a welfare shortfall, and repeat offending retirees. According to research in the article, the petty crimes are part of a vicious cycle. It said once released, the elderly are immediately turned to crime because they don't have money or family. Some of the elderly in the study had repeated the same crime over 6 times.
Bruce, this trend in part stems from Japan's rapidly aging society, 40% of which will be over the age of 65 by year 2060.
It's an enormous chunk of the society, and this is putting an enormous stress on the prison system, rather the public assistance system. So this report's basically saying that because of that, people are stealing sandwiches, canned goods, in the hope of solely going to prison, and then doing it again once they get let out.
Right. Definitely there needs to be measures to assist the elderly, because rapidly aging society is not a problem solely restricted to Japan. It's also happening in Korea and elsewhere around the world. So definitely there needs to be measures. All right. Thank you so much for that, Bruce.
No problem.
Virtual reality and journalism. They may seem like 2 concepts that do not share an immediate link, but you'll be surprised by how a growing number of news outlets are turning to VR as their new growth medium. Virtual reality taking journalism by storm. Our news feature tonight with Kwon Jang-ho.
Virtual reality is on the rise. In this year's launch of the latest smartphones by Samsung and LG, virtual reality headsets were pushed as one of the key pieces of tech gear to have. The Oculus Rift, HTC Vive and PlayStation VR headsets are all due for release before the end of the year as well. VR content is being created to span various formats, from video games to films. But one new content platform that has emerged is VR journalism. In 2014, Noni de la Peña, a journalist known as the godmother of VR news reporting, was commissioned by the World Economic Forum to produce Project Syria, an immersive non-fiction narrative depicting the plights of Syrian refugees. Not only did it receive rave reviews, it showed the possibilities of how the technology can shed more insight on current issues. Since then, interest has grown around the world. The New York Times, the Associated Press, BBC and others have also ventured into VR content and are exploring the possibilities.
Journalism has had a significant paradigm shift from following a creator-centered approach to a user-centered one. I think VR journalism is one that represents that change the best.
Korean news companies have also followed suit. The Korea Economic Daily's online site, hangyeong.com, was one of the first to go 3D. Last year's police raid of a Buddhist temple to arrest a labor activist caught national attention, and hangyeong.com produced an interactive 360-degree video showing police action and the media chaos surrounding the arrest.
When VR videos are seen on Facebook feeds, the wow factor and the power to draw people in is incomparable to regular 2D videos. For those stiff, boring stories about economics or politics, it allows readers to get more immersed and interested.
Technological advancements are making this all possible and accessible. For a few $100s, you can buy a 360-degree camera, link it with a smartphone, and you're ready to make VR films. Its size and simple setup also means it can be pretty much taken anywhere. But there are limitations.
You can't just film any old thing and expect it to be news content. We might say, this would be great if we filmed it for VR, but there's many cases where it just doesn't work. When you're filming a 360-degree shot, you have to consider whether it's worth it or not.
A question also remains of whether there is an audience for this new medium. We wanted to find out what people really think, so we got a smartphone and a low-priced cardboard VR display case and hit the streets.
The fact that I can choose to see what I want and take part actively, I think that's one of the good points.
You keep having to turn around, and it's uncomfortable. I think it will be tiresome if you have to watch it for a long time.
If there's a lot of content I can try out and it really feels as vivid, then I think it'll be good. I would probably keep trying it.
So it's fair to say people's responses have been mixed. And at this point, it's hard to say whether this is really the future of news journalism or not. But many in the VR field stress that right now, we're just scratching the surface of what VR can do.
Devices are going to develop further, so users and content creators will naturally become more interested, and more news outlets will have no choice but to get involved.
VR is a new frontier in news journalism that's still trying to find its feet. But much like video and the internet did before, it's bringing a fresh perspective in telling people's stories and presenting issues, which is difficult to overlook. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Well, let's head straight over to our Lee Ji-hyun for the weather update, and she is at the Weather Center. Now, Ji-hyun, a chilly start to Monday turned into a mild and beautiful afternoon.
Hello, Gonyoung. But here in Seoul, the gaps between the lows and highs were nearly 15 degrees Celsius today.
Wow, that's certainly a big swing in temperatures. Right. What kind of weather is in store for us tomorrow?
Well, compared to today, Tuesday's morning lows will be much higher, kicking off at 8 degrees Celsius, but afternoon highs will be slightly lower, but still above the seasonal averages. But in terms of air quality, conditions don't look promising at all for the metropolitan areas. Seoul will be dusty all day long with a dry weather advisory in place for a 5th consecutive day. So despite afternoon rain in the forecast for tomorrow in the capital area, it's not going to be enough to wash away dust or add some much needed humidity to the air. On that note, let's move on to tomorrow's temperature readings. Daily low here in Seoul will kick off at 8 degrees Celsius, while Busan and Jeju will start out at 11 and 10. And as for the daily highs, Seoul will top out at 14 degrees Celsius, while Busan and Jeju will see a high of 17 and 20. Now that's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that is our broadcast on this very beautiful Monday night. I'm Moon Gon-young. I hope you take a moment and look around and enjoy spring. Thank you as always for staying with us, and we hope to see you right back here same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.